How could you do this?
You are no longer welcome in this house.
The entire room went silent when the truth finally came out. My mother's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the marble floor. My father's face turned pale as he stared at the woman standing beside me, the woman they had mocked for months, the woman they called just a maid. And then I said the one sentence that changed everything. Now that everyone is here, maybe it's time you all learn who my wife really is. No one moved, because what I was about to reveal would destroy the lie my entire family had built their power on. But to understand why I married a maid, just to punish my family, you need to understand what they did first. I never believed revenge was a good reason to get married. Marriage, in my opinion, was supposed to mean loyalty, partnership, trust. But sometimes life puts you in situations where the only way to expose the truth is to play along with the lie. And that's exactly what I did. My name is Dave Park. At 34, I was the youngest CEO in my family's conglomerate. The Park Group owned hotels, logistics companies, construction firms, and half the luxury real estate along the coast. To the outside world, we were the definition of success. Powerful, respected, untouchable. But inside the family, things were very different. My father, Chairman Park, ruled everything with cold precision. He believed power meant control. My older brother Michael was the golden child, perfect in public, ruthless in private. And my mother, well, my mother cared about one thing: status. In our house, status was everything. Where you studied, who you married, which table you sat at during dinner, even the way you spoke. Everything was judged, measured, ranked. And that meant there were people my family considered beneath us. Employees, drivers, cleaners, maids. They were invisible to my parents. Except when something went wrong. Then suddenly they existed just long enough to take the blame. For most of my life I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed with them, but because fighting my family meant starting a war I wasn't ready for. That changed the day she arrived. Her name was Hannah, the new maid. I first saw her early one morning while I was heading downstairs for coffee. She was standing near the grand staircase, carefully wiping the glass railing. Her movements were calm and precise. She worked quietly, almost like she was trying not to be noticed, which, in our house, was probably the safest way to survive. But something about her stood out immediately. It wasn't her uniform. It wasn't even the fact that she looked younger than most of the household staff. It was the way she carried herself. There was a quiet confidence in her posture. Not arrogance, just dignity. And in a house like mine, dignity from someone in her position was rare. When she noticed me watching, she immediately bowed slightly. "Good morning, sir." Her voice was soft but clear. I nodded. Morning. That should have been the end of it. Just another employee doing her job. But as I walked past her, I noticed something strange. She wasn't just cleaning. She was reading. A small book rested on the nearby table, partially hidden under a cloth, and the title caught my eye: Corporate Governance and Ethics. Not exactly light reading for someone working as a maid. I almost laughed. But before I could say anything, my mother's voice echoed from the dining room. "Dave, breakfast." Hannah quickly closed the book and returned to wiping the railing, like nothing had happened. I didn't mention the book, not then, but something about that moment stayed with me. Because in my family's world, people were placed into very clear categories: executives, partners, employees, servants, and no one ever crossed those lines. But that morning, for the first time, I wondered if maybe someone already had. What I didn't know then was that Hannah's presence in our house was not an accident. And within weeks, my family would push me into a decision that shocked everyone. A decision that made headlines. A decision that turned the Park family into a scandal overnight. Because the CEO of Park Group had just married a maid. And according to my family, it was the biggest mistake I had ever made. But the truth was much more complicated than that. And the real story had only just begun. At first, Hannah blended into the background of the house. Just like every other employee my family hired, she moved quietly through the halls, Cleaning rooms, serving tea, organizing the endless chaos that came with living in a mansion, full of people who believed they were too important to clean up after themselves. But the more I saw her, the more something didn't add up. It started with small things. Little details most people would miss. One afternoon I walked into the study while she was dusting the bookshelves. Our study had thousands of books. My father liked to show them off during business meetings. It made him look intellectual, but the truth was he barely read any of them. Hannah, however, clearly did. I noticed the book in her hand. She wasn't dusting it, she was reading it. And not just flipping through it either. She was studying it. When she realized I was standing there, she quickly closed the book. But not before I saw the title. International Trade Law. That was not the kind of book someone casually picked up out of curiosity. I raised an eyebrow. You understand that? She froze for a moment. Then slowly nodded. A little. A little? I repeated. That book was something most of our legal team struggled with. Yet she said it like she was talking about a recipe. Before she could explain, footsteps approached from the hallway. My brother Michael. The moment he walked in, Hannah lowered her gaze immediately. Coffee, he said coldly, without even looking at her. She bowed slightly. Yes, sir. Then she left the room. Michael walked over to the bar counter and poured himself a drink. At noon? I asked. He shrugged. Meetings all morning. Then he glanced toward the door Hannah had just walked through. New maid? Yeah. He snorted. Another charity case mother picked up. I didn't respond. But that word stayed in my mind. Charity case. That was how my family saw the people who worked for them. Disposable. Replaceable. Invisible. But Hannah didn't feel invisible. If anything, she felt like someone hiding in plain sight. And over the next few days, the strange moments kept happening. One night I walked past the kitchen around midnight. The lights were still on. Inside, Hannah sat at the small staff table. A laptop was open in front of her. She was typing quickly. Too quickly, like someone used to working with spreadsheets and reports. When she noticed me, she immediately closed the screen. Sorry, she said quietly. I was just finishing some personal work. Personal work. From the quick glimpse I had caught, that looked suspiciously like a financial model. But before I could question her, my mother's voice suddenly echoed from upstairs. Hannah, where are you? Hannah stood up instantly. I should go. And just like that, the moment was gone. But now I was certain. There was something about her that didn't fit. Something my family clearly hadn't noticed. Or maybe, something they refused to notice. But the real turning point came a week later. The night everything started to unravel. Before we continue this story, let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who seemed completely ordinary, but deep down you knew they were hiding something? Because Hannah was about to prove that first impressions can be dangerously wrong. And trust me, what happens next shocked even me. But before we get to that moment, take 2 seconds to help the channel grow. If you're enjoying this story so far, tap the like button so more people can discover moments and meanings. And if you love emotional mysteries, shocking twists, and stories that make you question everything, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Also, stay with me until the end. Because the truth behind Hannah, and the reason he married her, is something no one in the family ever saw coming. Alright. Let's continue. It happened during one of my father's monthly family dinners. Those dinners were less about food and more about control. Everyone had to attend. Executives, family members, sometimes even investors. That night, the house was filled with powerful guests, politicians, business partners, people who believed my father could make or break their careers. The staff moved around the dining room like shadows. And Hannah was among them. She carried a tray of wine glasses to the table. Everything seemed normal, until my father's guest said something that made the room go still. We're finalizing the shipping contract next month, the man said. But the logistics costs are still higher than expected. My father frowned. Michael leaned forward. They started discussing numbers. Shipping routes, tariffs, warehouse delays. It was a complicated conversation. Even most of the executives at the table were struggling to keep up. And then, Hannah spoke. Softly. almost like she didn't mean to interrupt. "Excuse me." The entire table went silent. Every head turned toward her. She looked like she realized her mistake the moment she spoke. But the words were already out. "If the shipment routes were redirected through Busan's secondary port," she said carefully, "you could reduce the customs delays by nearly 40%. The room froze. I saw my father's eyes narrow. Michael slowly set down his glass. One of the investors laughed. A maid, giving logistics advice? But Hannah didn't laugh. She looked down immediately. "I apologize. I shouldn't have spoken." My father stared at her for a long moment. Then he waved his hand dismissively. "Leave." Hannah bowed and quickly walked out of the dining room. The conversation resumed. But something had changed. Because the numbers she mentioned were correct. Perfectly correct. And I knew that because I had seen those same projections in our executive meeting earlier that week. Which meant one thing. Somehow, the maid in our house knew more about our company's operations than half the executives sitting at that table. And in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. Hannah wasn't just hiding something, she was hiding a lot. But what I didn't realize yet was that my family had secrets too. Secrets far darker than anything I imagined. And very soon, those secrets would push me into a decision that shocked the entire city. Because the next thing my family would hear about me was a headline. A headline that read, "CEO marries household maid in shocking family scandal." But the real reason behind that marriage was something no one saw coming. That dinner should have been the end of it. A maid made a mistake, spoke out of turn, got dismissed. In my family's world, that's usually where the story ends. But Hannah's comment stayed in my mind long after the guests left. Because what she said about the shipping routes wasn't just correct. It was precisely correct. The kind of analysis that normally comes from someone with years of experience in logistics strategy. Not someone serving wine at dinner. I didn't mention it to anyone. Not to my father. Not to Michael. But the next morning, I started paying closer attention. And the more I watched, the stranger things became. 3 days later, I found her in the garden. She was trimming the roses near the fountain. At least, that's what it looked like. But when I walked closer, I realized she had headphones in. She quickly removed them when she noticed me. "Sorry, sir. What were you listening to?" I asked. "Just a podcast." "About what?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Global supply chain trends." I stared at her. "A podcast about supply chains?" She nodded, like that was completely normal. In my house, the staff usually listened to music, or called family members. But Hannah? She listened to business podcasts while pruning roses. Something definitely wasn't right. A few nights later, I was working late in the home office. Most of the staff had already gone to the staff quarters behind the mansion. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of typing. Fast typing. Coming from the library, I walked in quietly. And there she was again. Laptop open, multiple spreadsheets on the screen. Graphs. Charts. Financial projections. When she noticed me, she immediately stood up. "I'm sorry, sir. What are you doing?" I asked calmly. She looked embarrassed. "Practicing." "Practicing what?" She hesitated again. "Accounting." I crossed my arms. "You practice accounting after midnight?" She didn't answer, which somehow was an answer on its own. But I didn't push further. Instead, I just nodded and left the room. But that night, I couldn't sleep, because something about Hannah felt like a puzzle. And I had always been good at solving puzzles. So the next day, I did something I rarely did. I used my resources. Being CEO has its advantages. If I want information about someone, I can get it. Within hours. So that afternoon, I asked one of our corporate security analysts to quietly run a background check on Hannah. Nothing intrusive, just public records. Employment history, education, anything unusual. By evening, the report landed in my inbox. I opened it expecting something simple. Maybe she used to work in a small accounting firm. Maybe she dropped out of college. Maybe she just liked studying in her spare time. But the moment I read the file, I sat up straight. Because according to the report, Hannah Kim had no past, no university records, No previous employers. No social media. No professional history. Nothing. Just a single entry. Hired 3 months ago by my mother's personal assistant as a household maid. That was it. No one exists like that. Not in the modern world. Unless they're hiding something. Or someone is helping them stay hidden. And that's when the situation became more complicated. Because the next clue didn't come from Hannah. It came from my brother. Michael never cared about the staff. To him they were furniture. Objects. People who existed to clean up his messes. But suddenly, he started paying attention to Hannah. Too much attention. One afternoon I walked into the kitchen and heard his voice. You interrupted dinner last week. His tone was calm. Too calm. Hannah stood in front of him with her hands folded. Yes, sir. I apologized. You embarrassed father. I understand. He stepped closer. Where did you learn about shipping routes? Silence. Then she answered carefully. I read about it online. Michael laughed. Online? He leaned against the counter. You expect me to believe a maid studies logistics for fun? She didn't respond. And that's when I stepped into the room. That's enough. Michael looked over at me. His expression changed immediately. Oh, relax, Dave, he said casually. I'm just curious. Then ask someone else. He smirked. You're defending the maid now? I'm ending the conversation. Michael stared at Hannah for another moment. Then shrugged and walked out. But before leaving, he said something that made the room colder. Be careful, Hannah. He smiled. People who don't know their place tend to disappear quickly in this house. When the door closed, Hannah looked shaken for the first time. But she didn't say anything. She just returned to washing dishes. Like nothing had happened. And that moment made something clear to me. My brother didn't trust her. And if Michael didn't trust someone, he usually found a way to destroy them. Which meant one thing. Hannah was in danger. But what I didn't realize yet was that Hannah wasn't the only one with secrets. Because a few days later, I would discover something about my own family. Something that would completely change how I saw them. And it all started with a phone call that Hannah wasn't supposed to receive. The phone call happened late at night, almost midnight. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that only exists in very large homes where everyone is asleep and the hallways feel like empty tunnels. I had been working in my study when I realized I left my phone downstairs in the living room. Normally, I wouldn't bother retrieving it until morning. But that night I was expecting a message from one of our overseas partners. So I walked downstairs, and that's when I heard Hannah's voice. Soft. Coming from the back hallway near the service entrance. I stopped walking, not because I meant to listen, but because of what she said. No, they still don't suspect anything. My hand froze on the staircase railing. The house was dark, but the light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway where she stood. She had her back turned to me, speaking quietly into her phone. I understand, she said. But we're running out of time. Silence. Then she spoke again. Yes, he's exactly where you said he would be. A chill ran through me. He. Was she talking about me? I leaned slightly closer to hear. I'll keep watching, she continued. But if they find out before we're ready, everything will collapse. My chest tightened. Watching? Collapse? None of this sounded like a normal conversation. And then she said something that made the entire situation feel even stranger. Yes, Chairman Park still has no idea. My father. She was talking about my father. Before I could hear anything else, a floorboard creaked under my shoe. Hannah turned immediately. Our eyes met. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then she quickly ended the call. I didn't know anyone was awake, she said quietly. Her voice sounded calm, but her eyes were different. I stepped into the light. Who were you talking to? She hesitated. Family. Your family knows my father? No. Her answer came too quickly. I studied her face for a moment. You said Chairman Park. Her gaze dropped. I misspoke, but we both knew that wasn't true. And for the first time since she arrived in our house, Hannah looked nervous. I should get back to the staff quarters, she said softly. Then she walked past me and disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. But that night, I realized something important. Hannah wasn't just hiding her identity. She was watching my family. The real question was, Why? I tried to push the thought aside. Maybe I misunderstood the conversation. Maybe she really was talking about family. But the next morning proved that theory wrong. Because when I walked into the kitchen for coffee, Michael was already there. And he looked unusually pleased. He glanced up when I entered. Morning. Morning, I replied. He leaned back in his chair. You know that maid you like defending? Hannah? Yeah, he smirked. I think she's hiding something. My stomach tightened. What makes you think that? He shrugged casually. I had someone run a background check. My heart skipped. That meant two things. One, Michael had already started investigating her. And two, he probably found the same thing I did. Nothing, he continued. No past. No records. No history. He tapped the table with his finger. That's impossible. I stayed quiet. Michael studied my expression. You knew that already, didn't you? I didn't answer. Which was answer enough. He laughed. Interesting. Then his voice dropped, because if someone without a past shows up in this house, he leaned forward. They're either a spy, or worse. Later that afternoon I walked through the garage on my way out to a meeting. That's when something strange caught my eye. Hannah stood near the staff entrance speaking with one of our drivers. When she saw me, the conversation stopped immediately. The driver quickly got into his car and left. Hannah looked uneasy. What was that about? I asked. Nothing important, but something on the ground behind her caught my attention. A piece of paper. Folded. Partially hidden under a toolbox. I walked over and picked it up. Hannah's eyes widened slightly. Sir, but it was already too late. I unfolded the paper. And my breath caught. Because it wasn't a note. It was a company document. One of ours. Specifically, a confidential report from Park Group's shipping division. The same division my father and Michael had discussed during that dinner, and across the top of the page was a handwritten note. 3 words. Illegal transfer route. My pulse began to pound. I looked up at Hannah slowly. Where did you get this? She didn't answer. Her silence said everything. Because now the situation had completely changed. This wasn't just about a maid with a secret past. This was about something much bigger. Something connected to my family's business. Something serious enough that someone had written the words. Illegal transfer route. And in that moment, I realized the most dangerous possibility of all. What if Hannah wasn't spying on us for money? What if she was watching us? Because my family was hiding something illegal. But the real shock came later that night. Because that was the moment my father made an announcement. That forced me into the most unexpected decision of my life. A decision that would soon become national news. Because only a week later, I would stand in front of cameras, holding Hannah's hand, and telling the world that the CEO of Park Group had just married a maid. And according to my family, I had just destroyed the reputation of the Park Empire. But the truth was much more dangerous than a scandal. And soon, everyone in that house would find out why. I didn't confront Hannah immediately. Not after finding that document. Not after seeing the words illegal transfer route. Instead, I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket. Because if there was one thing growing up in the Park family had taught me, it was this. Never react too quickly. Observe first, then act. But the truth was, my mind wouldn't stop racing. Illegal transfers? Shipping routes? Why would Hannah have access to something like that? And more importantly, why was she investigating it? That night I finally decided to confront her. But before I could, my father made an announcement. And the moment he spoke, I realized the situation was far more dangerous than I thought. The entire family was gathered in the private dining room. Just us this time. No investors, no guests. My father sat at the head of the long table like he always did. Michael to his right, me to his left. My mother sat quietly beside him. The staff moved around the room preparing dinner. Hannah was among them, carrying dishes, serving tea, pretending to be invisible. My father cleared his throat. There is an important matter we need to discuss. Everyone stopped eating. Whenever my father used that tone, it meant something serious. He placed a folder on the table. I will be stepping back from daily operations within the next year. My mother looked surprised. Michael leaned forward. Retirement? Transition, my father corrected. Then he turned toward Michael. I will appoint a successor to lead the company. Michael smiled slightly. Of course he did. Everyone assumed he would inherit the position. But then my father said something unexpected. The board will decide between both of you. He looked at me. And Dave. Michael's smile faded. The room grew quiet. My father continued. Over the next 6 months, both of you will present strategic expansion plans. He closed the folder. The one who proves capable of protecting this company's future will lead it. Michael nodded confidently. I accept. I didn't respond. Because suddenly, the paper in my pocket felt heavier. Illegal shipping routes, financial documents, hidden information. If the company really was involved in something illegal, then this competition wasn't about leadership. It was about control of the secret. And that meant one thing. If Hannah was investigating the company, she might be walking straight into danger. Later that night, I found her in the laundry room. It was the only place in the house where the cameras didn't reach. She was folding sheets when I walked in. Hannah. She looked up immediately. Yes, sir. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and placed it on the table. Her face went pale. You dropped this earlier. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she slowly picked it up. Her hands trembled slightly. Where did you get this? I asked. Silence. Hannah. She took a deep breath. Then finally spoke. You shouldn't be involved in this. I frowned. That's not an answer. She looked up at me. And for the first time since she arrived in our house, she stopped pretending to be just a maid. The quiet humility disappeared. The careful posture disappeared. Instead, she looked directly into my eyes. And suddenly I understood something. Everything about her had been an act. You need to stay away from your family's shipping division, she said quietly. My pulse jumped. Why? Because something illegal is happening there. I crossed my arms. I already figured that part out, she hesitated, then added something that made the room feel colder. And it's bigger than you think. How big? Her answer came slowly. Big enough to destroy your entire company. The words hung in the air. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Who are you? She looked down at the document again. I can't tell you everything yet, that's not how this works, I said. If you're investigating my family's company inside my house, I deserve an explanation. She hesitated. Then she finally gave me the first real piece of truth. My brother disappeared 6 months ago. I blinked. What? He worked for your company, she continued. In the shipping division. My stomach tightened. What happened to him? No one knows. She swallowed hard. But the last thing he sent me before he disappeared. She tapped the document. Was this? Illegal transfer route. And after that, she continued quietly, the company reported him missing. My mind raced. So you came here, as a maid to investigate? She nodded. But then, she added something else. Something that made the situation even more complicated. At first, I thought the corruption was just inside the company. She looked up at me. But now I'm starting to think. Her voice dropped slightly. Someone in your family might be involved. The room felt suddenly smaller. Because there were only 3 people in my family who controlled shipping operations. My father, Michael, and me. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Hannah immediately stepped back. The maid mask returned instantly. The door opened. Michael stood there, leaning casually against the frame. But his eyes were sharp, watching both of us. Well, he said slowly. This is interesting. My chest tightened. How long have you been standing there? I asked. Long enough. His gaze shifted to Hannah. Then back to me. Looks like our little maid has been very busy. Hannah remained silent. Michael walked into the room, slowly, calmly, like a predator circling prey. You know, he said, I was starting to suspect something. He smiled. But now I'm certain. My pulse quickened. Certain of what? Michael looked directly at Hannah. That she doesn't belong here. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I think father would be very interested in hearing this conversation. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy. Because if Michael told my father about Hannah's investigation, everything would explode. And Hannah's brother's disappearance might be connected to something far darker than we realized. But the biggest shock of all was the decision I made next. Because, in that moment, with my brother about to expose her, I said something that shocked both of them. Something that would soon become the headlines seen across the entire country. I looked directly at Michael and said, "You can't fire her." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" I stepped beside Hannah and calmly delivered the one sentence that would start the biggest scandal our family had ever seen. "Because Hannah," I paused, "is my fiancé." The silence that followed felt like the beginning of a war. The moment the words left my mouth, the room went completely silent. Hannah turned toward me so quickly the folded sheets slipped from her hands. Michael blinked. Then he laughed. "You're what?" he said. "My fiancé." Hannah whispered my name under her breath. "Dave." But I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Michael. Because I knew my brother. If he sensed weakness, he would destroy her immediately. Michael slowly slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then, he walked closer. "You're joking." "I'm not." He looked at Hannah, then back at me. "This Maid?" "Yes." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You realize father will lose his mind." "I'm aware." Michael studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to figure out whether I had completely lost my sanity. Then he smiled again. That cold, dangerous smile I'd seen many times before. "Oh, I'm not telling father." That surprised me. "You're not?" He shook his head slowly. "No." Then he stepped closer to Hannah, close enough that she instinctively stepped back. "Because this is much better." His eyes flicked between us. "If you really want to destroy your reputation." He shrugged. "Who am I to stop you?" Then he turned and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him, and the tension finally broke. Hannah stared at me like I had just set the house on fire. "What did you just do?" She whispered. "Saved you." "That's not saving me." Her voice was still quiet, but the panic was clear. "You just told your brother we're engaged." "Yes." "And you think he believed that?" "He will." She shook her head. "No, he won't." I leaned against the table. "He doesn't need to believe it," I said calmly. "He just needs to not expose you yet." Hannah ran a hand through her hair. "This was never supposed to involve you." "Well," I said, that plan clearly failed. She stared at the floor for a moment, then asked the obvious question. "Why did you do it?" It was a fair question. Because the truth was, I didn't have to step in. I could have let Michael expose her, let security escort her out of the house, let her investigation end right there. But something about the way she talked about her missing brother, something about the documents, something about the quiet determination she carried despite working in a house full of people who treated her like she was invisible, made it impossible for me to walk away. So I gave her the honest answer. Because if what you're saying about the shipping division is true, I looked at her seriously. Then someone in my family might be responsible for your brother disappearing. The room fell quiet again. And if that's the case, I continued, I want to know the truth too. Hannah watched me carefully, like she was trying to decide whether she could trust me. Finally, she asked, "What's your plan?" I smiled slightly. "Well, since I just announced we're engaged, we should probably make it look real. Before we go further, pause for a second and imagine this situation. A powerful CEO, a maid secretly investigating his family. And now, a fake engagement that could destroy both of them. But the real danger hasn't even started yet. Because the moment Dave's family finds out about this engagement, everything will explode. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to like the video so more people can discover moments and meanings. And if you love emotional stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and shocking twists, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Trust me. The twist coming in this one changes everything. Now let's continue. The news spread through the house faster than I expected. By the next morning, everyone knew. And by everyone I mean, my mother. Which was actually worse than my father finding out first. She stormed into my office before I even finished my coffee. "You're marrying the maid?" Her voice echoed through the room. Hannah stood near the door, frozen. My mother pointed at her like she was pointing at a stain on the carpet. This is a joke, right? No. You can't be serious, I am. My mother looked like she might faint. Dave, do you understand what this does to our reputation? Yes. She laughed bitterly. All the elite families in this city will be talking about this by tonight. That's fine, no it isn't. She turned toward Hannah. How much are you paying her? Hannah's face flushed. I'm not being paid for this, my mother scoffed. Oh please. She turned back to me. This girl is manipulating you, enough, I said. The room fell quiet. Because in our family, no one interrupted my mother. Except me. She's not manipulating anyone. My mother stared at me. You're throwing away everything for her. Maybe she was right, maybe I was. But I didn't respond. And that silence told her everything. She stormed out of the room. But the real explosion came that evening. Because when my father heard the news, he called for a family meeting. And that meeting would lead to the moment you saw at the beginning of this story. The moment where my father dropped his wine glass. The moment where my mother realized the maid standing beside me was not who she thought she was. Because, by then, the truth about Hannah, and the truth about my family's shipping empire, was finally about to come out. The day of the so-called engagement announcement arrived. The entire mansion buzzed with tension. I walked beside Hannah, keeping my hand lightly on hers. She looked nervous, but there was that same quiet confidence I had noticed from the first day. My father, unaware of the truth, was preparing to introduce me at the family luncheon. He thought I was marrying the maid out of some impulsive, foolish defiance. The moment came. Cameras from local news outlets were outside the gate. Family friends, business associates, even distant relatives gathered in the grand hall. Father stood at the head of the table, clear authority etched in every line of his face. He cleared his throat. And now, Dave will announce his engagement. All eyes turned toward us. I squeezed Hannah's hand. Everyone, I began. I have something important to reveal. A hush fell over the room. Hannah stepped forward, just enough to be beside me. This woman, I said, gesturing to Hannah, is no ordinary maid. Gasps echoed throughout the room. My mother clutched her pearls, eyes wide with disbelief. Michael's jaw tightened. She is, I paused, building suspense, the former head of compliance for a multinational logistics firm. Whispers erupted. She's the one who discovered the illegal shipping routes hidden in our own company. And she has been tracking them meticulously, which is why she's been working here. To protect the people your family has hurt. I watched as disbelief, shock, and anger rippled across my parents' faces. Hannah nodded, calm under the pressure. My brother disappeared after uncovering this corruption. I'm here to make sure justice is done. Every eye in the room was locked on us. Michael finally spoke, his voice low and venomous. You manipulated him. No, Hannah replied, her voice steady. We're here to uncover the truth. The room felt like it could explode at any moment. And in that instant I realized that everything, the engagement, the appearance of rebellion, even the flash-forward scene from the beginning, had been necessary. Because if I had waited, Hannah might never have had the chance to expose the truth. My father's face darkened. You think you can come into this house and accuse your family? He thundered. I'm not accusing, I said firmly. I'm revealing. And if you had done your job properly, none of this would have escalated. Hannah stepped forward. I'm not here to destroy anyone, she said. I'm here to ensure that the people responsible are held accountable. Your family's empire is impressive, but it's built on lies. Mother screamed. You will not humiliate this family, I shook my head. Humiliation isn't the point. Accountability is. And the truth is long overdue. Michael, pacing now, glared at both of us. You think this is going to stop me? He sneered. You think marrying her that's going to save her from me? I turned to Hannah. Whatever comes, we face it together. Her hand tightened around mine. And in that moment the tension in the room shifted. Fear, disbelief, and confusion gave way to a powerful, undeniable realization. No one in that room had control anymore. Because the truth had a way of escaping, no matter how much power you thought you had. and that truth would change the family and the company forever. In the following weeks, the revelations unfolded publicly. The illegal shipping routes were exposed. Investigations began. Executives were held accountable. The city couldn't stop talking about the CEO who married a maid, a woman who had the intelligence, courage, and determination to challenge an empire from the inside. My family was shaken to the core. Father, humbled, eventually acknowledged the depth of the corruption. Michael, furious but unable to deny the evidence, retreated to rebuild his influence, this time more carefully. And Hannah? She remained by my side, not as a maid, not as a secret investigator, but as my partner, my equal. I looked back once at the mansion where the events had begun. All the power, all the wealth, all the titles, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the truth. And sometimes, to reveal the truth, you have to break all the rules. Because some secrets are worth exposing, even if it means shocking everyone you've ever known. Now, I want to ask you, what would you have done if someone in your family was hiding such a secret? Would you risk everything to uncover it? Which moment shocked you the most? The engagement, Hannah's revelation, or the confrontation? Comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you loved this story, subscribe to Moments and Meanings, turn on the notification bell, and join us for more shocking mysteries, twists, and emotional journeys.